Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. Today, I'm joined by a few folks to talk about NAC and how we do NAC. Maybe in the future, how we'll do NAC. So I'm here with Roel. Roel, how are you?
Hello. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you to being here as always. And then we have a couple of folks from Juniper Networks. We have Wes Purvis and Slava Demantiev. So do you guys want to introduce yourself? Slava, go ahead first.
Hi, everyone. First of all, Raul and Francois, thanks for having us. I'm part of the Juniper Mist product management team, just responsible for everything NAC related. So that's why I'm here. Wes, over to you.
And I'm Wes Purvis. I do wireless things at Mist.
Awesome. And then we also have Brian Ward from the Dartmouth College. He's here to share his experience working with a new NAC solution from Mist. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. I'm Brian Ward. As Francois just said, I work at Dartmouth College up in snowy, cold Hanover, New Hampshire. And yeah, I've been seriously kicking the tires on the Mist access assurance product, and so far it's been working for me.
Awesome. So we can, yeah, I guess. Well, thank you for
Happy
being
to
here
elaborate
as well.
on that.
All right. Well, we have an hour, so that's perfect. And thank you for joining us, Brian, because I know a lot of people want to hear feedback about real world deployment. It's always nice to hear about the marketing, but it's also, as engineers, always nice to hear about how does it really work in the field. So thank you for your thank you for being here.
Yeah, the marketing pitch was pretty strong and good. And being that I work with higher ed, I'm curious to know how it works for you. And that's why we have you on, right? And talk about what's new with access assurance, which I just like to call NAC, just because that's what a lot of people are familiar with. And I have had um, pretty bad experiences with NAC in the past, getting physical appliances on site and getting them running and then trying to integrate it into your network has always been a pain. And so I'm just curious with how something in the cloud now will make things easier for us.
Yeah, I guess to give a little bit of context before we let the guys talk on this, we can talk about where Mist is coming from. That they introduced their cloud native solution back in the days. Everything was managed through the cloud. And then with the purchase of Juniper, then we started to see switches and then one gateways appear in the Mist dashboard. But they didn't have like a true NAC enterprise solution as the other people do. And for the other companies, typically like Roel, you would say you would have like an appliance on site, and it was very much a non-cloud solution. So everyone was kind of wondering in the industry, okay, how is Mist going to solve that problem, being like a cloud-based solution or a cloud-native solution? How they're going to save that NAC problem? And then I believe Juniper purchased like a cloud NAC company back in the days. I think it was called White Sands, OneSand. And then a few months later, Mist came up with that new access assurance solution, which is pretty much a NAC in the cloud, if we want to kind of summarize it in one sentence. And this is where we are today, to kind of understand how it works, take a look at it. What do they support? What do they don't support? Can we implement it in an enterprise network? How does it work? And so that's kind of like where we're coming from.
Yeah, so we'll hand it off to Slava or Wes.
Yeah, I'll probably start, and then Wes will definitely chime in. But thank you for the context, actually. So, and that's a good segue, because you're right. We've started by acquiring a company called Whitesand, which was a pioneer in the cloud NAC. But what we did was we looked at the existing NAC market. Right? As you said, it was all primarily on-prem. You're dealing with servers. You're dealing with deployments of clusters, scaling, upgrades, all of these typical problems that you would be dealing with daily. But we also, coming from the Mist Cloud universe where we do everything cloud native, right? So we started with wireless, we've then natively integrated wired, we've integrated SD-WAN, and it's all part of the same cloud, right? It's the same experience. It doesn't matter where you have. So we didn't want NAC to be an alien product. We didn't want the NAC to be an overlay cloud solution and then just do some bolt-on integration with our cloud. We really wanted, okay, let's start from scratch how we would create a NAC if we would do it ourselves in a Mist cloud. That's what we did, right? So White Sand team effectively was doing this for us, and what we did was exactly that, right? So our focus was to bring in NAC that would be cloud native, so that you would launch right from the same Mist dashboard as you would be, managing your wireless, wired, or SD-WAN. We wanted to get rid of all of the infrastructure components that are on-prem as much as possible. We don't want customers to deal with upgrades, managing the scale, determining what that scale is going to look like. And we also wanted to make things very simple, right? From a user admin point of view. If you've ever seen any existing NAC product, like NAC solutions are generally very complex, right? Especially when it comes to configuration, even with basic things, right? So you typically need an expert on staff, or you need to outsource it to somebody to actually configure this for you in the first place. So we say, okay, we wanted things to be as simple as possible, but we don't want to take away the flexibility, right? We wanted to keep things flexible, but we want it to be simple. And obviously, it's very hard to make things simple. We can always expose every single knob out there, but then it's not a product; it's just a do-it-yourself kit. So, so what we did, actually, let me share my screen for a second. I'll do like just a couple of minute demo. So, if anybody is looking at the video, they can see it. So, what we've done is we are now in January, right? We are in January, so we are a little bit over 6 months since we've announced and launched the product on the Mobility Field Day, right? So this is access assurance. Now, what you see is under Mist Cloud, under organization, this is our vision, right? You have wireless, wired, WAN, you have access assurance. So you have the true full stack plus NAC in that same place. You're managing the whole network, your network ops plus NAC, without having to jump between different windows, different clouds, different products. So where the simplicity comes in is when you go to this auth policies, right? So everything that you would typically see in a NAC product, we've simplified dramatically so you can read all of your policy rules in one screen. So if you look at this, it's just a list of rules, right? They're evaluated from top to bottom. If you look at this list of rules, there are two main things. On the left-hand side, you have your match criteria in the rule. Basically, you're saying, okay, is it a wired user? What type of authentication that client is doing? Is it part of a specific group in your identity provider? If you want it to be more elaborate, then you can say, okay, is this device compliant based on integration with a third party, things like that. So you combine all these match criteria into one rule. If a client matches the condition, you move over to the right-hand side of the policy rule. And this is where you decide, okay, what do you want to do with this device? Do you want to allow it or not in the first place? And if so, where on the network this device belongs to? Which VLAN you're going to assign, which role, DACL, GBP tag, you name it, right? Anything that you can send back to the AP or a switch that's actually serving a client. And all of this was possible by just creating these conditions or actions via labels. So you could create these labels right from that same screen. You could look at any of the certificate attributes, IDP, related information, compliance status, the standard thing that you would expect, an NAC solution to do. And this made things really, really simple from a configuration point of view. The second aspect, which is also something that we tend to kind of skip a little bit, but when it comes to configuration, especially let's take wireless configuration, right? When you're integrating with a external NAC or external radios, what do you need to do? You need to create a WLAN or a SSID. You need to point it to your radio servers. And now if you're deploying in production, you have a cluster, you have just a couple of them. You need to add your APs and controllers as radios clients to that NAC server. You need to make sure the shared secret matches all of that. And it gets really, really complicated if you have a worldwide deployment and you have multiple sites geolocated in different places. Now, what do we do with our NAC? Well, you just select that your authentication server is missed off. Behind this button, behind this single button, we've hidden away such a complexity that people deal with every day, right? So behind this button, we now provide you with full redundancy, high availability, and geo-affinity, meaning that if you have sites in different parts of the globe, they would actually be steered to the pods that we have deployed locally within the region. So you get the optimal latency. Again, you have the high availability in case something happens with a specific pod. That's the simplicity we've been after.
So no more issues no more issues in communication between the APs and the NAC and the radio server. Yeah. And you do that over HTTPS?
It's over RADSEC, Francois.
RADSEC, so, okay. Right. So you need on the firewall, you need to make sure the ports are open.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and this is also actually a good design choice as we now like 6 months into deployment, because it's a cloud service, right? That's part that sits on the public internet. You don't want to transport unencrypted radios over UDP over internet. It never worked really well. RADSEC is beautiful because it's wraps everything into a TLS session. It's just very, very reliable. But with that missed off button, we've hidden all the complexity that's associated with RADSEC.
So we don't have to deal with certificates or anything like that.
Yeah, no. You just enable it. That's it.
And with the redundancy and high availability there, how many different, I guess, nodes are we talking about? Like, are they specific to a country, region? How does that?
They're regional. So the way this works is we have today we have a couple of pods. We call them pods in each region. So that's North America, Europe, Asia Pac. They're also deployed in different locations within this region. So depending on which country you're in, you'll be redirected to the closest pod. But these pods are actually the full NAC clouds, as we call them, right? So we are leveraging that same microservices architecture that we've been using in the Mist cloud since day one, right? So think of a typical a radio server where, let's say, NAC solution, right? You have authentication policies, events, logs, databases, all these things, and it all sits on the same box. In our case, every single feature, every single component is a separate set of microservices that are talking to each other independently, right? So you have policy module, authentication, you have your internal communication between the services, databases, all of that. And that allows us to scale effectively indefinitely, right? This allows us to make this service multi-tenant in a true way. So it's not like, oh, you have a cloud NAC, we will just split an instance for a new customer. That's not really cloud. So it's done in a way that allows us to scale really, really fast, and allows us also to deliver feature velocity and the security updates. So with that architecture, right, And this is one of the main pain points, right? Take your typical NAC solution. You deploy a certain version of that NAC solution. It works for you great. You're in production. Then say there is a security vulnerability a year from now. You need to patch it, or you need to upgrade to a new version. How often did it happen to any of you guys that you upgrade and something doesn't work anymore? Not even mention that,
Yeah.
how hard it is to upgrade in the first place.
Yeah, let's not
Okay.
talk about those kind of things because
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. So and this is actually kind of a topic, like, how do you run a cloud NAC, right? From a vendor perspective, right? Brian can probably talk about the customer point of view, but from a vendor perspective, when we deliver new features or new patches, the level of automation, the level of QA testing that goes into it, because every single customer that is served by our service has the same set of features, the same set of code. So whenever we make any single change, any new addition, it's gotta work for everybody, right? You simply have no option to do something that's not going to work, right? So you don't have an option. Okay, let me download this version or that version, or maybe this is going to work for me. None of that exists in the cloud world, right? So this is where the level of resiliency of the service is critical, and this was really the primary focus for us for the phase one of the product. Since we've announced this in like end of May, June, up until now, architecture was the primary pillar. And now looking at looking back 6 months from now, we are now at a point where we have over 115 customers already using access assurance. So that's, if you calculate, it's probably like 3-4 customers a week, new customers. So that's a pretty pretty significant number. We have large K-12 schools. We have large engineering companies, tech enterprises, even one of the top security companies that are using our product. And since then, we've already had about 8 to 10 different production pushes that introduce new features. And that always happens at runtime. It's not like you will get an email saying, oh, you know what, we will have a maintenance window, we need to do that. Doesn't work in the cloud world, right? So this is where where we are coming from.
Cool, thank you. That's actually a good background into how microservices work, because for someone like me, if you're just a network engineer and you don't really work in cloud infrastructure, knowing that you could push like the last thing you said, where you said you push the I guess updates as the system's running, and there isn't a notification that says maintenance coming. To me, that's how I would envision like a cloud.
Yep.
If I have something in the quote unquote cloud and I get maintenance windows and it's not going to be operational during that time, to me, that just sounds like it's an appliance in somebody else's rack. And that's what I want to go away from, is having to see those maintenance notices.
Exactly right.
So
Yeah,
Slava, as you're in the dashboard, would you want to kind of showcase, how you would, configure maybe the identity providers, or try to,
sure.
or you can run it as you want.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to show, like from a demo perspective, because we showed some of the pieces of the configuration, the policy rules, the SSID configuration. Now, one of the benefits of having Cloud NAC native to the actual network operations is the whole visibility of the end user connectivity experience, right? So if you look at, say, this client, just click on client insights. Let's look at what this client was doing. Now, what you will see is we combine the view of the network for that user and the view of the NAC as the client connects to the network, right? So, for example, here we could see client is trying to associate with the AP, and before it's associated, obviously it needs or authenticated and authorized. It needs to go through all of the next stages, right? So in this case, it's doing that 1x. It's using IPTLS to authenticate. So we track every single stage of that authentication and authorization process on the NAC side. And we are saying, okay, so in this case, client trusts the server, so that's step one. Great, it went great. Client displayed its client certificate. We now know everything there is to know about the client identity. That part went well. We trust that client cert. That's good. We then say, okay, we have our IDP configured. In this case, this is Microsoft Azure, or now it's called Entra ID. Hopefully, it's not going to be renamed in the next 6 months. So now we are making another lookup to the identity provider. And we do that so to check, is this account still valid in the identity provider? Maybe the cert is valid, but the account is disabled. And to get the groups or roles from that identity provider. So we know that user is part of employee group and other groups, et cetera, et cetera. We then use all of that information in our policies. So we see this event called client access allowed. We're saying this client is allowed on the network. This is the VLAN that we are going to assign. This is VLAN 751. And this is the specific rule that was hit during the authentication process, right? So we see that this client went into wireless non-compliant cert authentication, and it got the quarantine group, okay? So if we click here, it will actually move us back to the auth policy screen, and it will tell us this particular user authenticated successfully, but since it was non-compliant from an MDM point of view, it went into this rule and it went into the quarantine VLAN, right? So that visibility aspect gives you an option to basically answer a question. If things are not working as expected, either a client is moving to a different network or a client is not able to connect at all, you can now say, is it the problem with the client configuration? Is it the problem with the network or network services? Or is it the problem with the NAC config?
Wi-Fi, something, right? Yeah, I really like that you added all of that into the client insights view, because that is exactly all the steps you're showing as part of the joining to the network. Because we all know for Wi-Fi people, troubleshooting is very difficult, especially for non-Wi-Fi experts. And it always just goes, hey, the Wi-Fi is not working, or I dropped. But maybe it's something else. And here you're seeing the connection, the association. So you know that's good. But then now you've got the whole NAC process, and you're showing all of that in the same view. So it's really easy to see where a failure might occur.
Exactly. Yeah. And this, I just wanted to show you the example of the failure. See, this is where the client is failing to connect, right? And the only thing we see there is server certificate validation failure. So it's a clear indication that a client doesn't trust the server certificate. So it's either the client configuration problem, which we are saying go check your client config, or it's
malicious radio server.
Yeah, or it's not malicious radio server because it's already in our NAC.
Yeah,
our radio is not malicious.
Just not trusting the certificate.
I'm testing you, Slava.
It does,
but
it does open up a bunch of other questions. Like you're showing like a lot of this process, but some of the questions I would have is, all right, you have an IDP set up and you have certificates. How, one, which IDPs would be supported? And two, how do I get this certificate? What is a certificate? How do I get it onto a client?
Right. So let's start with IDPs. So I'm going to access identity providers. So today, we are primarily focusing on cloud-based identity providers, right? So that's your Microsoft Azure /Entra, Okta, Google Workspace, literally, anything that lives in the cloud, right? And when we're talking about, say, Azure, it's cloud, but it always has this on-prem component. So most customers are running it in hybrid mode, so they have local AD just because they had to keep it for some reason. But most of the things you can get from Cloud Azure directly, right? So you don't have to poke holes into firewalls into your private network. So we support these integrations either via API, so that's the OAuth type of integration, like with Azure and Okta, or using secure OLDAP, like we do, for example, with Google, because that's what Google prefers us to use. And that makes it, very very simple to integrate. And these identity providers, right, what are we using them for? So one is to get the user account information, right? So when a user is trying to connect, we need to know if that account is actually valid, which groups that account belongs to, so you can use that information in your policy rules to say if you're engineering, go to VLAN 10, if you're finance, go to VLAN 20, things like that, right? Furthermore, we are now very, very soon, we are adding a new identity provider, which we're probably going to talk about just a little bit later on, which is eduroam. So eduroam, we are adding as an IDP via Mist Edge. So Mist Edge is actually as a platform that started as a channel concentrator service for our wireless deployments in large campuses. It evolves to host other services like a proxy into eduroam. And what we are doing here is really, because eduroam is very it's very legacy radius minded, in a way that it needs to have a static public source IP address, right? In order to let you talk to eduroam, and you need to have it unique per institution, per organization that's trying to integrate with eduroam. So for us, Mist Edge is that gateway, right? It provides us that static public IP address as a gateway to eduroam. So all of the authentication that comes to access assurance, when it's from a home organization, right? So from the home users, it will be authenticated at access assurance. That's most of your authentication traffic, right? That's your majority of your campus population. Anything that is coming from external visitors, right? So visitors to your campus from external institutions, or your own roaming users that are going to other institutions, that will go through the Mist Edge and then go to eduroam. So that's something that's coming very, very soon. It's practically around the corner. But that's another IDP we'll be adding in. And what you also see here,
if I could just jump in real quick, we're also hoping that the folks who run eduroam will realize that cloud networking is actually a thing, and start to change some of their outdated policies and preferences on, no, you must have a single static IP. We cannot work with a domain name, or we can't point to a cloud load balancer IP address. So Wes and Slava, hopefully in the not too distant future, the requirement of having a Mist Edge won't be there for eduroam.
We're all for it, Brian. We would love to get rid of that. Okay. So yeah, so thanks, Brian, for this, and just so I can finish with the IDP piece, and this is something that is actually new that we've added yesterday, no, the day before yesterday, actually. So this is where we've added the capability of integrating with Microsoft Intune as the MDM provider. So MDM, it's mobile device management. Nowadays, Microsoft Intune in enterprise world manages pretty much every single laptop or mobile device that's owned by the company, and it pushes all the configuration profiles, updates. It checks the health of that device. It also delivers certificates to the devices. So that's also to Roel's question, how do you get a certificate to the device? So our integration with Intune is actually done to achieve a use case to do posture compliance, right? So what essentially is happening, I will go back to the auth policy page. What essentially is happening, Intune has an agent running on every device it manages, and it knows everything there is to know about the device. What is running there? Does it have the latest antivirus updates? Does it have firewall enabled? All of that, and it has what's called compliancy policies in there. So when Intune says the device is compliant, we are saying we are using that status in our auth policy and say, okay, if the client is compliant from an MDM point of view, go into the unrestricted VLAN, you're good to go. But if Intune tells us, you know what, that device is either non-compliant or we don't know what the compliance status is yet, then hold on a second, you can still connect, but go to quarantine VLAN until you fix the problem. Right, so that integration is something we've launched, very, very recently. It was a major ask in enterprise by enterprise customers because Intune is basically out there as one of the most popular MDM providers. More will come later on. Okay. And I think, Roel, your last part of the question was, how do you get certificates onto the device? So, and what is a certificate? So when you look at like organization access certificates page, that's what I'm showing right now. You have a list of certificate authorities that you would upload here. These are the root CAs or intermediate CAs that we, as our NAC, will trust, right, in order to perform client authentication. So basically, if you have a client that has a certificate issued by any of these certificate authorities, we will trust it. We'll let it authenticate and go through. Right, it's just a simple trust relationship, right? Now, how do you get an actual client certificate onto the device? That's a totally different discussion, right? So in enterprise, that will be typically done via MDM route, plus there will be either an on-prem or cloud PKI or cert infrastructure that would issue these certificates, and MDM will help deliver them to the devices, right? So that's in enterprise, it's generally automated because you manage every single device that belongs to the organization. In the higher ed, and Brian, I think, can talk about a lot about it, is a totally different story because in higher ed, most of your client population is BYOD. You're not managing the device. You don't know what the device is. And I don't know, Brian, do you want to talk about how you're trying to solve this problem?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, for our managed machines, we could push certificates to the client device through our existing MDM, but we're over 80% BYOD. And that's even true for faculty and staff. A lot of faculty show up to teach classes with the MacBook that they've owned for the past 2 years. They don't need to buy a new one. Or for one reason or another, they go and buy a new machine and it does not get enrolled in our MDM. Maybe they have lab equipment they need to connect to, and for one reason or another, being domain joined isn't possible. So in higher ed, there's a number of ways to solve this. And if it's all right if I name drop another company here, Secure W2 seems to be one of the leading certificate deployment options, at least for higher ed. they'll work with other types of organizations as well, but they have a really good pedigree with higher ed institutions. So we are in the middle of deploying that as well. We're switching to certificate-based auth. We're switching to missed access assurance. Those are two separate projects, which is making it a little more complicated for me to roll out. But switching out your Radius platform is not a simple task. It's something that's going to take a long time. So one of the things that I really like about the Secure W2 product is that they do all the testing for the client devices. Like they've tested iPhone, they've tested Android, Mac, PC. They even have a Linux version, which is astounding. And every time Apple releases, this is, I don't know, 17.1.3, suddenly things break. Well, they do all that testing for me. They take care of the root CA, issuing certificates, the revocation lists. There's a pretty slick admin interface for both admins and help desk. There's an API that you can talk to. So that's how we're getting the certificates onto our devices. And it's, from a user perspective, I've found it to be very simple. You go to a landing page, click connect, sign in with SSO, and it just runs this magic piece of software that they've developed. That not only installs the certificate, but also the EduRoam profile. So if you've worked with the cat.eduroam tool before, it's like that. It's just better.
Maybe I can. It sounds like a really good solution, and I think it can solve a lot of issues. I've also seen other vendors propose some sort, and back in the day with Roel on the podcast, we actually had someone from Beyond Identity. Remember that, Roel? So it's very much like you download an agent or a piece of software, and then it installs all of the profiles and certificates you would need. And sometimes it comes from the networking provider. So we could imagine like Mist coming up with their own little application. You install it, and then it gathers your credentials to connect to the Wi-Fi, but also all of the certificate that you may need. So if you have BYOD users, you would just ask them to, like Brian said, go on the portal, log in, ask them to download that agent, and it will just sit in the top bar of the computer. And as they go into the on campus, automatically it will connect to EduRoam with using their credentials and the right certificate. So it sounds like it's a similar kind of solutions, but that's also something that could come from Mist maybe one day. I don't know. I don't want to add stuff on your to-do list, but that could be possible, I think, from you guys.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's possible. And I just want to say Secure W2 is not the only product out there. Like you just mentioned, Beyond Identity. If you're a 100% Windows domain environment, chances are your AD has already pushed certificates to your devices and created user certificates. You could just use those existing certs.
Yeah.
For
so you're saying you could use
NAC
group policy with Windows as well.
Exactly.
Just to get these certificates on there.
Exactly. And chances are the machine already has it. You just need to install the network profile that says use this certificate.
Yeah. Okay. But is there a Mist certificate that every device has to have on there to work with the access assurance?
So like with any NAC product for Radius, the client device needs to trust the issuing CA of the Radius server cert. So in the case of Mist access assurance, they out of the box, they provide you a full PKI cert chain for their cloud Radius server. You can use that. Mist handles cert rotation. I think Slava every 6 months, you had said. The Radius server cert gets rotated. So as long as your client devices are trusting the issuing CA, which Mist provides you, there'll be no problem. If you want to, you can upload your own cert chain, and Mist Access Assurance will happily use that instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a way to not be a cert guy. Because I'm sure like someone's gonna look at this and go, well, someone has to be responsible for the certificates. And what's possible here is if we're just using the Mist access assurance, let's say I don't have an IDP or anything, I can just use the Mist certificates and have that rotation done automatically.
Yes and no. I think it's important to distinguish that the Radius server certificate chain is separate from your IDP.
Yeah.
So the IDP is what's providing information about the user when they're connecting. So as Slava said, it's like, is this account disabled? Is it still allowed to connect? What group membership does it
Yeah.
have? And then the Radius server cert chain is for the server to say, hey, client, this is who I am. If you trust me, continue connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those who don't know how access assurance source or NAC works, you will need some backend directory to say these users are authorized, these computers are authorized, and that's where that IDP comes in.
And there's
That's probably the easiest way, but I'm taking a slightly different approach. I'm removing the IDP from the puzzle entirely.
Okay.
So I'm encoding my group membership into my user certs. So when a user connects, Mist Access Assurance just says, yes, this cert is valid, it hasn't expired, and oh, by the way, I can see right here in this certificate what group you belong to. So that way I'm removing the dependency on any sort of IDP, and I'm removing the latency of having to do that IDP query and response.
Got it.
So
Okay.
you don't need to have an IDP, but chances are you already have one. So you might as well leverage that on day one.
There's also I wanted to mention that Slava actually recorded a couple of videos on the documentation website where he go through setting up that kind of PKI in a lab environment, which was very helpful for me. Thank you, Slava, for doing that. So if you want to test out and better understand all of the different PCs and the component, I would go through, maybe we'll put a link in the description, but maybe you can go through that exercise of setting up that this on your laptop or on your computer, and it kind of helps understand which certificates are in play and how that relation works with the IDP.
Yeah, and I'm also curious with Brian is how you begin to integrate NAC or access assurance in an existing, you've got your existing infrastructure, you're using Radius, maybe you're already doing 802.1x for those who've got Eduroam. How do you bring access assurance in and migrate there?
That is currently what I'm racking my brain figuring out. I've got a solid plan. Once I pull it off, I'll certainly be writing up an article about how to do it. But yeah, we're already running Eduroam full production. We've got users worldwide leveraging it. And how to kind of Indiana Jones my existing NAC solution for Mist without kicking all my users off the network. That requires some very careful planning. If you really understand how Radius and certs work, it's very logical. So I've been spending the past couple of months really refreshing my own memory on it's like, okay, so how does this cert work? What is it used for? What would happen if it suddenly changes? And the way that I am going to be moving forward with is I'm going to set up. So I should also say I'm switching from MSChap v2 with a username and password to EAP-TLS all at the same time. So why not just change everything, right? I have discovered that if I set up my current NAC environment to support both MSChap and EAP-TLS, which that works fine. That's how Eduroam functions today. Then I can slowly get my user population to uninstall their old profiles and install their new ones. Alongside the profile, they're also installing their new certificate. So once I start to see the scales change of, MSChap v2 logins to EAP-TLS logins, I know, all right, At this point, 50% of my population's cut over to the new service. Once I get to that 99%, that's the day I shut off my existing NAC and point all my WLANs to Mist. So in testing, that's worked really well. One of the things that I thought was going to be a major roadblock was, okay, not only am I changing the authentication method, I'm changing which server I'm pointing to, I'm also changing the certificate that the Radius server is presenting. So I'm going from my existing on-prem, radius.dartmouth.edu cert to auth.mist.com. Well, my clients today don't trust that new one. And it turns out that all modern operating systems, I think from Android 9 and above, you can actually specify multiple Radius servers and multiple certificates in the same profile. So the day that I flip that switch, the clients should just automatically say, oh, I trust this server too. I might as well connect. And it should be totally transparent to the user.
All right. I know who I'm going to about certificates after. I don't like dealing with certs.
Yeah, I'm kind of like you, Roa, with the certs. It's probably
Roa,
because
you don't want to be you don't want to be a cert guy. You're really talking about yourself.
Yeah, I'm literally talking about my experience here.
Okay, so why don't we go back to the different EAP methods that is supported? Because I know it's a little different in the cloud versus what we used to, or what we do, on-prem. Slava, do you want to address that?
Yeah, sure, Francois. So today we support either certificates, so that's EAP TLS, or TEAP, which is the dual phase certificate authentication. And we are also supporting TTLS, which is using username and password behind the scenes. But we do not support PEAP MSCHAP v2, right? And the reason for that, again, in the cloud world, the way that passwords are hashed in the cloud IDPs will never use the MTA hash anymore because it's considered insecure for the past 20 years. Now, finally, Microsoft says, okay, actually, with the recent enterprise and education Windows editions, they actually disable PEAP MSCHAP v2 completely. You cannot use it until you change your registry, and there is a backdoor to re-enable, but they're basically forcing you to, guys, please stop using PEAP MSCHAP v2. This is not secure. Use certificates. That's the recommendation from Microsoft. You're also seeing like Android that they've been pushing all their users since a couple of years now to forcefully trust the server certificate. You have to specify. You cannot just say, oh, well, let me skip the server cert validation. Sorry, if you have Android, it's going to be really painful for you. So that that creates challenges when you're trying to use PEAP as your BYOD solution, right? As what Eduron was doing for many years in the past, because now it requires so much input from an end user that it's you have a better chance of breaking this than making it work, right? And again, I think Brian has a lot more to say about this.
Yeah, I just want to pause for a second, let that bombshell that Slava just dropped sink in. If you are currently signing in to a .1x network using a username and password, that's something called MSCHAP v2. That is being deprecated. I am really concerned that Microsoft hasn't more widely announced this. They're just releasing updates to especially Windows 11. You may have seen articles about, oh, here's how to disable credential guard or other security features. You need to start planning a migration away from MSCHAP v2 now. For Microsoft to be saying, hey, this technology we invented, we're getting rid of it, that's a pretty bold move on their part. So again, if you're logging in with a username and password, you need to read up on what this change is. It is going to be a large change for you as a network administrator.
So where do you see people going? Do you see people going to eepttls?
So it really depends on what your client devices are.
Mm-hmm.
EEP TLS, 1T, is pretty widely supported. TTLS is supported by most client devices, but not all. Slava, you mentioned something called EEP TEAP, TEAP.
It's only Windows.
It's supported in Windows only. So if you're supporting a hybrid of types of devices, TLS is the safe bet. It's been around for years. Client support should be there. What I'm telling my users and my help desk is if you can connect to Eduroam today, you'll be able to connect tomorrow with a certificate. There are very few devices I've come across that don't support EEP TLS and only support MS Chat v2.
Yeah.
Any modern device is not going to have a problem.
And it's actually, so TTLS is supported by all the platforms. The challenge is you have to configure this applicant, and it's sometimes very painful, right? Sometimes it requires a lot of input. And we've actually published an article that's called Passwords versus Certificates, right? It's fundamentally, you have to decide whether you want to use certs or password-based authentication. And TTLS or PEEP, it's still single-factor password authentication. The challenge is with password authentication, you're making an end user part of that connection process. So you're trusting the end user to input the username correctly, the password correctly, making sure they don't log their account because they've, fat fingered the password multiple times. With certificates, you're taking end user out of that process completely. It's fully transparent. They don't know what's happening. They're just connecting to the SSID and it just works, right? They don't have access to the cert. They cannot break it.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. Once you
it
get
just
your
works unless
delivery.
you're me doing the certs. And I know you guys mentioned a lot about certificates, but there will be some or a lot of organizations who just can't make that transition to cert-based authentication. What about things like Mac authentication bypass and devices that just won't have certificates installed? Will Access Assurance still be able to protect a network if you've got that type of device on?
So I'm going to let Slava talk about MacAuth, but for people who are thinking, oh man, my org is not going to want to change to certificates, with MS Chat v2 being deprecated, that change is out of your hands. Like right now in Windows 11, you can still disable features and change registry stuff to re-enable it. You won't be able to do that in the future. So if you're thinking, oh, I'll just stick with passwords, what do I care? That's the wrong approach to be taking.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So yeah, MacAuth, sure. We support MacAuth, but at least on the wireless side, right? What we have and what we've been proposing to, especially headless devices or say BYOD scenarios, say student dorm rooms, is the multi-PSK solution that we've had that's part of this whole framework, right? This is where we have the whole self-onboarding mechanisms for people to get their own personal pre-shared keys via single sign-on. And that's just the PSK from an end user perspective, right? It's just it's a PSK attached to a user or a device identity. So that solves a lot of problems with headless devices, your typical gaming consoles, things like that will never support .1x to begin with. And then it allows, say, students to bring their own staff into their dorm rooms and use their personalized key to get all their devices grouped together. So that's one of the things we support. Right. And also, MacAuth is another option, but that's more. Today we are seeing this more used at the wired side, not at the wireless side. Like wireless we have better ways to do it rather than using macOS. Yep.
Okay. I think that's good to know, because I saw you with the policies and I saw MAB on there, so I thought I would ask. And I'm
Yep.
sure there's other people who have that. I have that in my environment, and one thing that I do have in my environment that's might be similar for others who are going to Mist is we haven't done a rip and replace. Like, we've slowly transitioned to Mist. Now, if I'm thinking about doing access assurance, what happens if I've got missed access points and another vendor? How does that work? And will I have issues there, or maybe there's a specific deployment strategy?
Right. So with third-party devices, the way we handle them with access assurance is, again, by using a Mist Edge. So remember, we've been talking about Mist Edge acting as a edge run proxy. Mist Edge can also act as a proxy for any third-party device, whether it's a third-party controller, AP, switch, you name it. Doesn't really matter. So the way this works is you point your existing, say, wireless network to a Mist Edge as the radio server. From there, Mist Edge will take it over and wrap it into RATSEC, send it to our cloud. You still get all the visibility in terms of authentication. You don't get the visibility from a network side, because obviously we're not managing that infrastructure, but you still get all the views on how the authentication process is happening for those.
Okay, and that also means I don't have to have Juniper switches, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to be a requirement in order to
No.
use access assurance.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, because I also know a lot of people who just have the missed access points, and maybe they want to use access assurance, and their main question is, well, I don't have full stack Juniper.
Yeah.
Is that a deal breaker?
Most customers we've been deploying so far will have some form of a migration process. So not all of the sites are migrated to either full stack Juniper Mist or just wireless or just wired. So there is always some component to the wired and wireless that third party. And for those, we just need a Mist Edge to do the proxying. So
Okay.
that's the only thing.
And
you don't even need Mist APs to use this. So
Correct.
if you're now sweating bullets saying, oh man, I'm running Windows NPS, I'm using MSChap v2, I don't know the first thing about certificates, how do I get started on this plan to avoid this bombshell? You can continue to use all of your legacy equipment and just say, hey, I just want Mist Access Assurance to handle the radius for me. So you can set up a access assurance. It's the easiest radius product I've ever had to configure.
Okay.
And use that as kind of a stepping stone out of the path of this oncoming train.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brian. Brian, that you made in the ease the ease of configuration, because with the other platform, I know it used to be kind of a headache, and you needed a plan on how you would need to do things.
You needed somebody with an expert level certification.
Yeah. You don't need to take a month-long training course before you even open the box of the appliance.
1 month.
It was beautiful though, and it worked. It was beautiful, but it was definitely a little of a learning curve. So I want to know, based on your experience deploying it for your university, how was the process? And also I want to know, how does your team work with it? Have you had the support help desk involved with it? Can they actually do some troubleshooting without calling you all the time? And then I have another question, maybe more for Slava, but we haven't talked about Marvis, and my question was more, now Marvis knows about all of this data. Can Marvis actually tell us more information about the authentication? But Brian, go ahead, share your experience.
Yeah, so this might sound cheesy, but it took longer for me to manually install a certificate on my Android phone than it did for me to build out my radius policy.
Okay.
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the first time I did this, I think I had missed access assurance 100% functional in under a half an hour. And it took me over an hour to correctly get a certificate and an eduroam profile installed by hand on an Android device.
Did you send it to you via email? That's how I did it for my Android. I sent the certificate via email and then clicked on it.
I think that's actually how I did it. Yeah. So I mean, it's the simplest user interface I've ever experienced in terms of Radius. Of course, there's an API. If anyone knows me, I'm using the API for some of this too. But you don't have to. It's literally it's almost point and click to build your policies. I had to work with my identity team and my sysadmin team who run Active Directory in Azure, just because I don't have access to create, OAuth tokens and things like that. But even that was trivial once I copied and pasted everything. And then building the PKI with a product like Secure W2, that also took some time, mainly because I've never really done certificates at this scale before. Yeah, I've gone and bought a certificate for a website, but this is a little different. So I really wanted to make sure I was understanding, all right, what does this checkbox I'm turning on actually do? So I spent a lot of time reading as I built out the certificate PKI. In terms of other members of my team, the help desk, I've showed this to our InfoSec group. Having all the information within the Mist dashboard, that client's insight page that Slava was showing, it's like, wow, this is everything all in one place. I can see, everything from the initial 802.11 authentication to the handshakes, is the server cert trusted? Is the client cert trusted? Did my IDP respond? What policy did I hit? It's very clearly laid out in human language, and I don't have to click through 17 different pages or different applications to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
really
then
like
get a
the fact that
certificate.
everything is on the same dashboard. That's usually makes,
So you're
makes
saying
sense.
we won't need a Mist AI access assurance certification to get
Expert.
I think if there's ever a JNCIP for Mist, this will be part of it.
That'll be covered there. Yeah.
But I could have handed this off to any other engineer on my team, and they would have been able to build out the policy. Like, I'm looking at my screen. Granted, I don't have this completely, totally built out, but just to be able to say for eduroam, my users versus guests, I have 6 lines of policy total. That includes, I want to block certificates, I want to block users. I have 3 different levels of trust or VLAN assignment for my users, and then I have eduroam visitors. And that's it. It's not, well, this service is in this order and it hits this policy, and then there's this authentication workflow and that authorization, and then the accounting and the enforcement. It's if I match this criteria, I'm either permitted or denied, and I get this role. I wish it were more complicated so I could talk about it more, but it's not.
It's the policies really help to simplify everything, and I really like what Slava showed, which was where in the client insights, if there was a user issue or if it matched, it actually points to the policy there.
Yeah, you can use that when you do your troubleshooting, and you can start with one policy, test it, and then you move on to the next one. Like, you don't have to do all of it at once. So it's easier than it sounds.
And there's no worry about, oh, if I want to add another policy, am I going to break everything? No, you're building out a policy statement, and as long as you don't touch anything else, there's no chance that you're going to break something.
So Slava, about Marvis, I want to give you a chance to talk about this. What I would love to see is a visual, the clients connecting to the network, the different steps. And if there's a problem, we can have like a red kind of like what you guys do for the MS Team troubleshooting, with the Marvis interface. Having some sort of visual like this would be nice.
Actually, what we've done, Francois, is really we have the raw data in the client insights, right? That gives you information on a per client basis. Now, with existing mechanisms that we already had with Marvis Actions that can detect basically a blast radius of the problem if the problem exists, right? So to give you an example, so there is one large university that we shall not name. They have about 30,000 users on eduroam daily. Out of those 30,000 users, in a day, they have almost 800,000 authorization failures a day. And now you would think, oh my God, is that network melting down? Is that the problem? Is that something I should worry about? Should I panic? Should I ignore? Like, what do I do? So what Marvis is doing is basically it takes all this, grabs all this data, all this raw data, and can tell you, oh, you know what? Is it a site problem? Is it the couple of APs that are, where all these authentications are failing? Is it actually a couple of outliers? So in that case I was describing to you, it was 10 clients that have been misconfigured. They were just sitting there and trying to authenticate all day long, right? And so what Marvis is doing is basically it reads that data for you and it tells you, do you have a real problem that you need to worry about in the first place? And if so, what the scope of impact there is, right?
Does it tell you if it's like a client certificate issue versus?
That's where the NAC feeded information helps, right? So now instead of just saying authorization failure generically, we can now say, client is failing because of expired cert or not trusting the server cert or something else, but we are now to the point of where the issue is.
Right? Okay.
I remember you guys had that series of podcasts where you looked at different vendors and the different failure scenarios, and always the problem was, okay, there's a radius problem.
Yeah.
What is it? So
yeah, you have to go back to the logs.
Insurance, we can tell you what is that radius problem.
Yeah, that was actually a good part because radius was always like its own thing, right? Like you didn't know what was going on there unless you talked to the radius guy, the radius person. So being able to integrate all of that into the single dashboard and into Marvis and even having a service desk person be able to ask a question and get a response, that does save a lot of time, I think, because a lot of issues, tickets would stay open because of having to transfer that to another person or department to figure out what's going on.
And I'll add, in that, as part of that series, watching that, I realized that we weren't clearly calling out a radius reject. So we now more clearly call out a radius reject when it comes in the client events of the auth failure.
There you go. Now you have that last piece of the conversation, but you still got to talk to the radius person.
Unless you have access to it's right there.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming on. It does open up a lot of more scenarios and questions I want to talk about, specifically in higher ed. I mean, we can keep going, right, and talk about deployment strategies, troubleshooting, the gotchas, how we test it out, how we roll it out. There's so much to go into, and we only have so much time, but I think we'll have future topics like that. I mean, Brian's going to be writing up a blog post. I will probably be rolling it out at some point. So we'll have future discussions, but I think this one right here is a good start. And so I want to thank you guys for hopping on.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that there's a lot of documentation on the MIST documentation website, and they have different guides. So if you're wondering, how do I configure the OAuth with Azure? Well, they have a guide, and they kind of guide you through the process. So I would invite you guys to take a look at this documentation. It's pretty good if you want to get started and try it out.
Cool. anything you guys want to say? Where do you want to send people? Just straight to the Juniper website? I mean, we have a link that we'll add to the show notes if you guys want to find out more, and we'll probably find those videos that Slava created and we'll add those into the show notes as well. But we encourage the listeners to ask any questions. I'm sure you guys will have questions, and just thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having us, Ruel and Francois.
Thank you, guys. Always a pleasure. Come back anytime. Thank you, Brian, also for your time.
Of course.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Brian.
it.
And thanks,
Always
Wes.
happy to
Thanks,
talk with
Wes.
you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.